The world of magic doesn't end with the turning of a page. Love rises and falls anew, forbidden like poison or blazing like a phoenix's flame. The heroes we thought we knew uncover their hearts once more. So step into the enchantment of emotion and welcome to a world where love is written anew. The rain had stopped just before dusk, leaving Hogwarts wrapped in the faint scent of wet stone and earth. The castle, though still grand and glittering in its candlelit majesty, bore the quiet weight of a place recovering from war. Scorch marks lingered on the walls near the Great Hall. The once proud gargoyles on the astronomy tower still waited to be repaired. Hermione Granger walked slowly down the corridor toward the dungeon classrooms, clutching a stack of old potions texts to her chest. It had been nearly a year since the Battle of Hogwarts, and though she had returned to complete her NEWTs, she sometimes felt as if she were haunting the school rather than studying in it. So many faces were missing. Fred, Tonks, Lupin. She had learned to fill those silences with purpose. Professor McGonagall, now headmistress, had assigned Hermione to help several professors with research work, to keep her mind occupied, as she'd put it gently. Hermione didn't mind. It kept her busy, and it kept her from thinking too much about Ron. Things between them had never gone as she'd imagined. They'd tried, honestly tried, in the months after the war, but the easy laughter that had once existed between them had faded into strained silences. Ron had joined George at Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, throwing himself into the chaos of jokes and inventions. Hermione, ever the academic, had returned to Hogwarts. The distance between them wasn't born of anger, but of different dreams. And though she didn't regret the choices she'd made, there were nights she wondered what might have been. Tonight, however, her thoughts were focused on something entirely different. Professor Slughorn's old potions storeroom. She reached the dungeon door and gave a polite knock. "Come in, my dear," called Slughorn's familiar booming voice. Inside, the room was warm and golden, the air scented faintly with vanilla and something sweetly metallic. "Ah, Miss Granger," Slughorn said, puffing up with a smile. "Just in time. I've decided it's high time someone helped me sort through these old supplies. Half of them might explode if left too long." Hermione set her stack of books on the nearest table. "Of course, Professor. I'd be glad to help." Hours passed in the comfortable rhythm of sorting and labeling. Slughorn hummed tunelessly as he peered into dusty cauldrons, muttering about youthful experiments and ungrateful apprentices. Hermione catalogued ingredients, carefully noting which had expired and which could still be used. It was nearly midnight when her hand brushed against something odd. A small, leather-bound notebook, wedged behind a crate of powdered bicorn horn. The cover was cracked, the edges darkened by time. On the first page, in Slughorn's loopy handwriting, were the words, "Experiments on Emotional Influence. HEF. Slughorn." Hermione hesitated. She knew better than to pry into a professor's personal notes, but Slughorn had said to discard anything useless. Surely this was part of the research archive. Curiosity won, as it often did. Flipping through, she found diagrams of potion circles, lists of ingredients, and elaborate sketches of potion bottles marked Amotentia variants. Her brow furrowed. Love potions were among the most dangerous and unethical forms of potioncraft, banned outside controlled research. But this one was different. In a careful annotation, Slughorn had written, "An attempt to brew a potion that reveals the drinker's truest affection, not creates it. Intended as an antidote to obsession-based charms. Results inconclusive." Hermione's pulse quickened. A potion that revealed genuine emotion rather than forcing it. That was a concept worth studying. Imagine what it could do. It could expose false infatuations, mend broken hearts, or even confirm true feelings. She found herself thinking of Ron again. What if she'd misread everything? What if the war, the fear, the grief had simply clouded her heart? The idea was foolish, reckless, completely against Hogwarts' safety rules. And yet, she couldn't help herself. When Slughorn retired for the evening, she tucked the notebook discreetly under her arm. That night, in the quiet of the Gryffindor common room, Hermione spread her notes across the table. The fire cast warm shadows on her parchment. Her logical mind told her to forget it, to burn the notebook, to focus on her studies. But her heart, bruised and curious, whispered otherwise. She could brew it, just once. With her usual precision, she began planning. She'd need powdered moonstone, a drop of her own blood, and something symbolic of the person she believed to love. A strand of Ron's hair, perhaps. The potion would act as a mirror of truth. The next evening, after classes, she slipped quietly into the unused dungeon lab. Steam curled above the cauldron as she stirred clockwise, counting her breaths. The potion shimmered faintly silver, like starlight caught in water. When it was done, Hermione hesitated. She didn't want to drink it, not yet. Instead, she corked a small vial and set it aside, intending to test it safely later. But fate, as always, had other plans. A sudden noise startled her, the sound of a door creaking open. She turned sharply, the vial slipping from her hand and shattering on the floor. The liquid hissed, spreading like spilled mercury. And standing in the doorway, pale and startled in the dim light, was Draco Malfoy. Hermione froze. Malfoy's grey eyes flicked from her face to the broken glass, then back again. "Granger," he said quietly, "what are you doing?" The potion gave a faint pulse of light. Then, just as Hermione opened her mouth to answer, it vanished, soaked into the stone floor between them. Neither noticed the faint silver shimmer that lingered for a moment, linking their shadows together before fading into the darkness. For several seconds, neither of them moved. The air between them shimmered faintly, charged with something unseen, yet deeply unsettling. Hermione's heart raced as she tried to decide whether to explain or to simply vanish into the stone floor herself. Draco's pale, aristocratic face remained unreadable, though there was a hint of sharp curiosity behind his cool expression. "I asked," he said again, his voice lower this time. "What are you doing down here, Granger? This isn't one of your study rooms." Hermione straightened, refusing to be intimidated. "I could ask you the same thing, Malfoy. I have permission from Professor Slughorn to use this lab for independent work." His brows arched slightly. "And I suppose independent work involves brewing mysterious silver potions that explode when someone walks in." Hermione glanced at the broken shards of glass. The potion had seeped completely into the stones, leaving only a faint silvery outline where it had fallen. A chill ran through her, but she kept her tone steady. It wasn't an explosion. It was an accident. Malfoy tilted his head, his gaze lingering on the faint shimmer at their feet before it disappeared completely. "You always did have a flair for dangerous experiments." He turned to leave, but hesitated. There was something odd about the way his hand trembled slightly as he reached for the door. "Malfoy?" she asked, despite herself. He blinked, as if shaking off a strange dizziness. "Nothing. Just a headache." And without another word, he swept out of the dungeon, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Hermione exhaled, trying to convince herself that what she had seen, the light, the shimmer, the strange sensation in the air, was nothing more than a trick of her imagination. She cleaned up quickly, cast a vanishing spell on the residue, and promised herself she would never, ever tinker with experimental magic again. But that promise was short-lived. The next morning, Hermione woke feeling different. It wasn't pain, exactly, but an awareness, as if someone else's thoughts were brushing lightly against her own. She pushed the feeling aside, dressed, and headed to breakfast. The great hall was humming with chatter, students laughing, owls swooping, the ordinary comfort of daily life at Hogwarts restored at last. Hermione spotted Harry and Ginny at the Gryffindor table and waved, sliding into her usual seat. "Rough night?" Ginny asked, passing her pumpkin juice. "You look like you haven't slept." Hermione forced a smile. "Just too much studying." Harry gave her a look that said he didn't believe her, but didn't press. Across the hall, Draco Malfoy sat at the far end of the Slytherin table, apart from his usual crowd. He looked pale, distracted, and for a fleeting instant, when Hermione's eyes met his, she felt it again. That faint, inexplicable pull, like an invisible thread tightening between them. Her breath caught. Malfoy frowned, as if he too had felt something, then quickly looked away. By lunchtime, the feeling had grown stronger. Whenever he entered a room, she felt it. A flicker in her chest, a strange warmth that wasn't entirely unpleasant. She caught herself watching him, and that frightened her most of all. That afternoon in potions, fate decided to make things worse. "Today," Slughorn announced cheerfully, "we'll be pairing students for advanced brewing. Complex potions require cooperation and patience." His gaze swept the classroom like a lazy owl. "Let's see. Miss Granger, you'll be with—" "Ah, yes, Mr. Malfoy. Perfect balance of intellect and precision." Hermione's quill nearly snapped in half. Draco's mouth tightened. "Professor," he began smoothly. "Perhaps—" "No complaints," Slughorn interrupted, beaming. "Now, everyone, fetch your ingredients. Amatentia variants are notoriously difficult, so pay attention." Hermione felt her stomach twist as Draco took the seat beside her. The smell of his cologne, subtle like cedar and smoke, reached her, and for some reason it made her heartbeat stumble. They worked in silence for the first 10 minutes. Hermione measured each ingredient precisely, refusing to look at him. But when she reached for the vial of powdered moonstone, her hand brushed his. A spark, warm and electric, shot through her fingers. Both froze. She withdrew her hand sharply. "Static," she muttered. "Right," he said dryly, though his tone lacked its usual bite. As they stirred the potion, Hermione felt her concentration falter. A strange rhythm began to form. When she turned her spoon clockwise, his followed in perfect sync. When she paused, he did too, without even glancing her way. The potion shimmered faintly silver again, the same hue as the one that had spilled the night before. Slughorn passed behind them, clapping happily. "Excellent work, you two. Such fine coordination." Neither replied. By the end of class, the potion was flawless, so flawless it gleamed like a mirror. Hermione caught her reflection in it and saw for just an instant not her own face, but Draco's. She stumbled back, knocking into the table behind her. I think we added too much moonstone," she stammered. Draco was staring at the potion too, his expression unusually serious. "That wasn't moonstone," he murmured. "That was something else." They cleaned up quickly, neither speaking further. But when Hermione left the classroom, she felt his gaze follow her. Not cold, not mocking, but searching. That night, sleep refused to come. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt something flicker through her, flashes that weren't hers. A dimly lit room filled with green light, a pale hand gripping a quill, a sense of guilt so heavy it ached in her chest. She sat up, trembling. Those weren't dreams. They were memories. His memories. The following morning confirmed her worst fear. As she reached for her bag in the library, a sharp pain struck her temple. And across the room, Draco Malfoy winced and pressed his own hand to his head at the exact same moment. Their eyes met, and realization passed silently between them. Something bound them now, something born from that spilled potion in the dungeon, and neither of them had the faintest idea how to undo it. For 3 days, Hermione tried to pretend nothing had changed. She buried herself in textbooks, took meticulous notes in every class, and avoided the dungeon corridors as if they carried a contagious curse. But no amount of logic, no distraction of parchment or ink could silence the strange new rhythm that pulsed faintly beneath her thoughts. A heartbeat that wasn't entirely her own. Every so often, her mind would flicker, flashes of sensations that didn't belong to her. The faint scent of rain on stone, the chill of the Slytherin common room, the sound of quills scratching in solitude. At first, she thought she was imagining things. Then, on the 4th morning, it happened again. A jolt of emotion so sharp, she gasped aloud in the library. Shame, cold and heavy. Not hers, but his. Hermione clutched the edge of the table and closed her eyes. No, this isn't possible. This isn't happening. But it was. Somehow, the potion, her potion, had tied her to Draco Malfoy. She found him later that day in the courtyard, standing apart from the crowd as usual. He was staring at the lake, his expression distant. For a moment, she hesitated. The last thing she wanted was a confrontation, but she couldn't bear the uncertainty any longer. "Malfoy," she said, her voice steady, though her stomach twisted. He turned, silver-grey eyes wary. "Granger, come to lecture me again." "Not this time." She folded her arms. "You've felt it too, haven't you?" His eyes flicked briefly toward the castle. "If by it you mean the delightful experience of hearing your voice echo in my head every few hours, yes." She frowned. "You can hear me?" "Not exactly." He rubbed his temple, looking as if he regretted answering at all. "More like impressions, feelings, thoughts that aren't mine. It's bloody annoying, frankly." Hermione's breath caught. So it was true. The potion had formed a connection, a magical bond neither of them understood. "We have to fix this," she said at once. Draco gave a short, humorless laugh. "You think I want to spend my days sharing emotions with the golden girl of Gryffindor? Trust me, Granger, I've tried breaking it. Spells, wards, nothing works." She bit her lip, mind racing. "There has to be a counter. Love potions are temporary unless reinforced with—" "This wasn't a love potion," he interrupted, his tone sharp but not cruel. "Whatever you were brewing that night, it wasn't Amotentia." Hermione's eyes dropped. It was an experimental variant, a potion meant to reveal genuine feelings, not fabricate them, but it wasn't supposed to bind anything. Draco stared at her for a long moment, then quietly, "So, this is your fault." She flinched, though his words lacked venom. "Yes," she said softly, "it is." A pause. The wind stirred the last of the autumn leaves between them. Finally, Draco sighed. "Then we fix it. Together." It wasn't an offer. It was a reluctant truce. From that day forward, they began working after hours in the same dungeon lab where it had all begun. Slughorn, unaware of the cause, was delighted to see such collaboration between houses. He supplied ingredients freely, thinking it an academic partnership. But Hermione and Draco both knew it was anything but simple cooperation. Each night they brewed, argued, and tested theories. Each failure left them more frustrated and more aware of the bond they couldn't escape. Sometimes, without warning, they slipped into each other's moods. Hermione would find herself inexplicably angry, while Draco would freeze mid-stir, eyes shadowed by a sadness he couldn't name until he realized it wasn't his own. Despite it all, something subtle began to shift. One evening, as they stood over a simmering cauldron, Hermione noticed the way the light caught in Draco's hair, silver gold in the torchlight. He wasn't sneering or mocking as he used to. Instead, he looked weary, older somehow, the arrogance worn thin by too many sleepless nights. "Why are you even still here?" she asked suddenly. "You could have left after the war, gone anywhere." He didn't look up from the cauldron. "Because leaving doesn't erase what you've done. I thought staying might balance something." She studied him. It was the first time she'd heard him speak of guilt. "I thought you didn't care about redemption." He gave a faint smile. "I didn't, until I realized I had nothing left to prove it to myself." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. For the first time, Hermione saw beyond the sharp angles of his face, saw the exhaustion beneath, the haunted look of someone trying to outlive his own mistakes. That night, the connection between them flared again, stronger than before. When their hands brushed while passing a vial, a rush of warmth surged through them both. Hermione gasped, and in that instant she saw through his eyes. Herself, standing there in the golden light, fierce and determined, a force of compassion he didn't understand. She stumbled back, heart pounding. "Did you just—" Draco's expression was unreadable. "Yes," he said quietly, "and I wish I hadn't." But there was no contempt in his voice this time, only fear. After that, things changed. The bond deepened, unpredictable and disobedient. They began to sense not just emotions, but memories. Brief flashes of childhood, of laughter, of pain. Hermione saw glimpses of a lonely boy in a grand manor, of a mother's quiet comfort. Draco saw images of books, of courage, of a girl who refused to break, even when the world fell apart. Neither spoke of what they saw, but they both knew. By the end of the week, even Hermione's iron discipline couldn't hide her exhaustion. One evening, as they left the dungeon, Draco stopped her. "You can't keep doing this," he said. She looked up, startled. "Doing what?" "Pretending you're fine when you're not." His gaze was steady, too steady. "Whatever this bond is, it's draining you. I can feel it." Hermione's lips parted in protest, but then she sighed. "I know, but if we stop, it might get worse." He hesitated, then did something completely unexpected. He reached out and touched her hand. The gesture was brief, almost hesitant, yet it grounded them both. "Then we fix it," he said again, softer this time. "But not at the cost of your health, Granger." Hermione looked at him, truly looked, and for a fleeting second she felt something dangerous, something she hadn't expected to feel toward Draco Malfoy. Trust. The night air outside the dungeon was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. As they parted ways in the corridor, Hermione felt that odd warmth return, the unspoken awareness that their fates, however unwillingly, were now entwined. She told herself it was temporary, just a magical accident, nothing more. But as she lay awake later, staring at the flickering shadows on her ceiling, she knew the truth she didn't dare name. The bond between them was no longer just a mistake. It was beginning to change her heart. The next morning dawned pale and cold, the kind of winter light that made the castle's stones seem sharper, its shadows longer. Hermione woke with the uneasy weight of dreams that slipped from her memory the moment she opened her eyes. Fragments of silver light, whispers, and the faint echo of a heartbeat that was not her own. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to slow her breathing. The bond. It hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown stronger overnight. Down in the great hall, the usual morning chatter seemed distant. She caught sight of Draco across the room, sitting alone at the end of the Slytherin table, a book open in front of him, but clearly unread. The moment their eyes met, a sharp pulse of awareness shot through her, like a string stretched tight between them. He felt it too. She saw his shoulders stiffen, his fingers still against the page. Neither looked away. "Hermione!" Ginny's voice broke the moment. "You all right? You've been staring at Malfoy for nearly a minute." Hermione blinked, startled. "What? No, She forced a smile. "Just thinking." Ginny followed her gaze, suspicion narrowing her eyes. "Thinking about him?" "Of course not," Hermione said quickly, reaching for her tea. "Just distracted, that's all." But Ginny's sharp gaze lingered a moment longer before she shrugged. "If you say so." When Hermione left the hall, she felt the bond flare again, a flicker of irritation that wasn't hers, echoing faintly in her chest. Somewhere in the castle, Draco Malfoy was annoyed. By the time potions class began, the strange energy between them had reached a feverish hum. They avoided eye contact, spoke only when necessary, and kept their distance as best they could. But magic has its own will, and when two wizards share a spell-born connection, proximity only feeds it. That day, they were assigned a potion requiring synchronized brewing, the Draught of Insight. Ironically, it was designed to align two minds toward a single purpose. Slughorn, blissfully unaware of the irony, clapped his hands. "Trust your partners. The potion reacts to emotional balance. Harmony produces clarity. Discord produces smoke." Hermione nearly groaned aloud. The moment they began, she felt the strain of divided will. Draco's movements were controlled, deliberate, while hers were precise and quick. Their rhythm clashed. Steam hissed, turning violet instead of gold. "Stop rushing," he muttered under his breath. "I'm not rushing," she snapped quietly. "You're over-stirring. I'm correcting your measurements." His eyes flicked up, cold and sharp. But behind the frost there was heat, the kind that made her pulse skip. "Of course you are." The potion bubbled dangerously, reflecting their tension in its swirling depths. Hermione forced herself to focus, matching his tempo spoon for spoon. Slowly, the colour stabilized, violet fading to a rich amber glow. The cauldron's surface smoothed, like calm water after a storm. "There," she murmured, relieved. Draco didn't reply. He was staring into the potion, his expression unreadable. The amber light reflected in his eyes made them seem molten. "It reacts to us," he said quietly. Hermione frowned. "What do you mean?" "When we fought, it boiled. When we moved together, it settled." His gaze lifted to hers. "The bond isn't just emotional, Granger. It's magical resonance. Our magic is connected." The words sent a shiver down her spine. "That shouldn't be possible," she whispered. He gave a faint, humorless smile. "And yet, here we are." They completed the potion in silence, both lost in thought. When class ended, Draco lingered, watching her as she packed her books. "Meet me tonight, the old lab." Hermione hesitated. "Why?" "Because if we don't find a way to undo this soon," he said softly, "we might stop being able to tell where you end and I begin." The seriousness in his tone left her no room to refuse. That evening, she slipped into the dungeon after curfew. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of old magic. Draco was already there, a single lantern casting golden light across the worn stone walls. The cauldron before him was empty, but several ancient texts lay open, written in runes Hermione barely recognized. "These are from the restricted section," she said, her voice low. He glanced up. "I had permission." She raised an eyebrow. "Well," he amended, "I had means." Hermione bit back a sigh. "You're impossible." "And you're predictable," he countered, but there was the ghost of a smile on his lips. For hours they worked, reading, translating, cross-referencing. Most of the texts warned against the dangers of emotional enchantments. Few offered solutions. Hermione traced one passage with her finger, reading aloud. "When two hearts are bound by unfinished magic, the potion must be completed or unmade. To sever the bond, both must choose it freely, without hesitation or deceit." She looked up slowly. "So, if one of us wants to keep it, the spell remains." Draco met her gaze. "Then let's hope we both want it gone." But as the words hung between them, neither spoke further. The candlelight flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. Hermione felt the strange hum again, that pull between them, quiet but insistent. It wasn't just proximity anymore. It was connection, understanding. She looked down quickly, pretending to read. Her mind screamed at her to stay focused, to remember who he was. The boy who'd called her names, who'd once stood beside darkness. But the man before her wasn't the same. His voice was steadier now, his cruelty stripped bare, replaced by something she didn't quite know how to name. At one point, she reached across the table for a quill at the same moment he did. Their fingers brushed. The lantern flared, as if feeding on the contact. Hermione's breath caught, and in that instant, the bond surged open. A torrent of memories flooded through her. Flashes of his past, his mother's trembling hands, his father's cold voice, the endless silence of guilt. She gasped, stumbling back, overwhelmed. Draco caught her by the arm. "Granger!" She looked up at him, eyes wide, tears welling. You didn't want to be." "Don't," he said sharply, but his voice cracked. Hermione's throat tightened. For all her years of studying magic, She had never encountered a spell that made her feel someone else's truth so completely. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He stared at her, disbelief flickering across his features. "Why?" "Because I understand now," she said quietly. "And it hurts." For a long moment, neither spoke. The bond pulsed softly between them, no longer intrusive, but alive, like the quiet beat of a shared heart. Finally, Draco released her arm. "Go back to your dormitory, Granger, before someone catches you." She hesitated, then nodded. But as she reached the doorway, she turned. "Tomorrow," she said, "we'll keep working." He didn't answer. He simply nodded once, eyes unreadable. Hermione stepped into the corridor, her heart pounding. The cold air hit her face, but it didn't clear the confusion in her chest. She had come here to break a spell, and now she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to. Snow had begun to fall outside the castle by the next morning, dusting the towers in white and muting the world into silence. The first snow of winter always carried a kind of peace at Hogwarts, yet for Hermione, peace was the one thing she couldn't find. All day, she felt the echo of last night, the pulse of the bond, the warmth of his hand around her arm, the memory of his eyes in the flickering lantern light. She had meant to spend the morning in the library, but she found herself staring absently at her parchment, ink pooling on the edge where her quill hovered too long. Across the castle she could feel him. It wasn't words or thoughts, not exactly. More like ripples of emotion brushing against her own. Fatigue, restlessness, the low hum of guilt that never seemed to leave him. By evening, she could bear it no longer. She told herself she was only going to the dungeon to continue their research. Nothing more. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. The dungeon was dimly lit when she entered. Draco was already there, his sleeves rolled up, wand hovering over a cauldron that emitted faint spirals of greenish steam. The air smelled of mint and iron. "You're late," he said without looking up. Hermione set down her books. "I wasn't aware we'd set a time." "You're predictable enough that I assumed you'd come the moment classes ended." She bristled, but his tone lacked its usual edge. In fact, there was something almost weary in it. "What are you working on?" she asked, stepping closer. "Testing a separation elixir," he replied. "If it works, it should weaken the magical tether between us." "And if it doesn't?" He gave a humorless smirk. "Then it might blow up in my face, but at least that would end the problem one way or another." Hermione frowned. "That's not funny, Malfoy." "Wasn't trying to be." She sighed, moving beside him to inspect his notes. His handwriting was elegant but precise, every line measured and clean. "You're missing something," she murmured, tracing a line with her finger. "The stabilizing agent. Without it, you'll just create a feedback loop." He looked at her then, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "And here I thought Gryffindors preferred charging in without thinking." "Only when absolutely necessary." She reached for the powdered aconite, adding a measured pinch into the cauldron. The mixture brightened, turning from green to soft gold. Draco arched an eyebrow. "Show off." Hermione ignored him, though she couldn't hide the faint smile tugging at her lips. For a moment, they stood in companionable silence, watching the potions swirl. It was strange, how natural it felt. The rhythm of their work, the quiet understanding that passed without words. She realized she no longer felt the same sharp hostility toward him that she once had. The war, the hatred, the old rivalries. They seemed distant now, worn smooth by the relentless pull of the bond. When the potion finished brewing, Draco filled 2 small glass vials and handed her one. "If this works, we should feel a shift," he said. "A sort of detachment." Hermione nodded. Together they lifted the vials. "To the end of magical accidents," he said dryly. She rolled her eyes. "To fixing our mistakes." They drank. The potion was bitter, burning down her throat like fire and frost all at once. Hermione gasped, gripping the edge of the table as a wave of dizziness swept through her. The room seemed to twist, walls bending, torches flaring, the air vibrating with invisible force. She could feel the bonds stretching, pulling taut as if fighting to remain whole. Then, with a sharp snap, everything went still. She stumbled forward, catching herself against the table. Draco was breathing hard, his face pale. Did it work?" she managed. He closed his eyes as if listening inward. "I don't know." Hermione focused, trying to sense him. For a moment there was nothing. No hum, no warmth, no faint echo of his emotions. Relief flooded her chest. "I think it did," she whispered. "It's gone." Draco exhaled shakily, setting his vial down. "Finally." They stood in silence, the air suddenly cold without the invisible thread that had bound them for days. Hermione should have felt free. She told herself she did. Yet somewhere beneath the surface of her relief was an ache she couldn't name. "Well," she said at last, forcing a smile. "That's one problem solved." He nodded. "Congratulations, Granger. You've successfully rid yourself of me." The words were meant as a jest, but something in his voice made her look up. His expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes, those grey, stormy eyes, held a flicker of something else. Regret, perhaps. She wanted to say something, but no words came. Instead, she gathered her notes and turned toward the door. "Good night, Malfoy." "Good night," he said quietly. Hermione left the dungeon, her footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. Yet, as she reached the top of the staircase, she hesitated. The castle seemed too quiet, as if listening. She pressed her hand to her chest, half expecting the familiar hum to return. Nothing. Just silence. But when she reached her dormitory and finally lay down, a dream took her, one so vivid it stole her breath. She was standing by the black lake beneath a silver moon. Snow drifted softly over the frozen surface, and across the water a shadow moved toward her. It was Draco. He looked younger, lighter, his eyes unguarded. "You can't keep pretending," he said, his voice echoing strangely. "You may have broken the bond, but you haven't changed what it showed you." Hermione took a step back, her breath misting in the cold air. "What do you mean?" He reached out, fingers almost brushing hers. "That some things don't need magic to bind them." She woke with a start, the words still ringing in her ears. The dawn light streamed through the curtains, pale and gold. Hermione sat up slowly, pressing a trembling hand to her chest. The bond was gone. She couldn't feel him anymore, and yet somehow she could. A whisper of thought brushed her mind, faint and fleeting, but real. "You're not rid of me yet, Granger." Her breath caught. It wasn't spoken aloud. It wasn't even clear. But she knew the voice. And as snow continued to fall beyond the window, Hermione realized with a mixture of dread and wonder that the potion had not failed. Not entirely. It had changed. The connection was no longer a spell of compulsion or magic. it was something far more dangerous, something real. Winter deepened its hold on Hogwarts. The snow no longer fell gently, but in thick, swirling curtains that muffled every sound, turning the castle into a world of silver and shadow. Students hurried between classes wrapped in scarves and cloaks, laughter echoing in the frozen courtyards. Yet, for Hermione, the cold seemed to settle somewhere deeper, somewhere even a roaring fireplace couldn't reach. It had been nearly a week since the potion, since she and Draco had broken the bond, or thought they had. At first, she had convinced herself the silence meant freedom. But freedom, it seemed, came with a strange emptiness. The first few days passed quietly enough. She studied, attended classes, joined Harry and Ginny in the common room for tea. But at odd hours, she'd feel it again, a flicker at the edge of her thoughts, like a voice just out of hearing. Sometimes it was faint, a whisper of doubt. Other times it was emotion, a pulse of anger or fear that didn't belong to her. And every time it led her to the same conclusion. The bond wasn't gone. It had buried itself deeper beneath the surface, quiet but alive. Hermione tried to ignore it, but her own curiosity betrayed her. Late into the night, she found herself reopening Slughorn's notebook, tracing the faded words again and again. To sever the bond, both hearts must renounce it freely. She had agreed to end it. But had he? The question gnawed at her until she finally decided to find out. She found Draco in the library that evening, tucked into a shadowed corner with a pile of dusty tomes. His pale hair caught the lamplight like frost, and for a moment she simply stood there, watching him. It struck her how much he had changed. The arrogant posture was gone, replaced by quiet focus. When she finally stepped closer, he looked up, his grey eyes cool but not unkind. Granger. Malfoy. She sat opposite him before she could change her mind. He raised a brow. Come to borrow my notes again. No. She folded her hands, gathering her courage. I came to ask you something. That sounds ominous. Did you mean it? She asked quietly. He frowned. Mean what? When you agreed to break the bond, did you truly want it gone? Draco stared at her for a long time, then leaned back slowly in his chair. I thought I did, he said at last. Who wouldn't? Sharing thoughts with you was hardly a peaceful experience. Hermione bristled. You're impossible. He smirked faintly. And you're predictable. Then softer. But that wasn't an answer, was it? No, it wasn't. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I wanted the connection gone because it frightened me. It felt intrusive, like it was peeling back layers I wasn't ready to show. His gaze flicked to hers. And I didn't think you'd want it either. Hermione swallowed hard. It's not about what I want, she said carefully. It's about the fact that it didn't end. I can still feel it. Draco went still. The lamplight trembled between them. You're certain? Yes. She met his eyes. And I think you can too, even if you don't want to admit it. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then slowly, Draco closed his book. Then we need to test it. She blinked. Test it. He stood, gathering his cloak. You're the one who's always insisting on proof, Granger. Let's see if your theory holds. They left the library together, the corridor echoing faintly beneath their footsteps. The castle was quiet at this hour, the portraits asleep in their frames. When they reached the courtyard, the night air hit them like a wave, sharp and cold, filled with the scent of snow. Draco turned to her. Close your eyes." "What?" "Just do it." She hesitated, but obeyed. "Now," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Think of something, anything, that would normally frighten you." Hermione frowned, unsure where this was going, but she focused. The memory came easily. The Battle of Hogwarts, the screams, the flash of green light. And then she felt it, faint but unmistakable. A ripple of fear that wasn't her own, answering hers like an echo. Her eyes flew open. Draco was watching her, his expression tight. "You felt that too, didn't you?" She nodded slowly, her breath visible in the cold air. "Then it's true. The bond is still there." His jaw clenched. "Then we didn't break it. We only changed it." A long silence stretched between them. Snowflakes drifted down, settling on his cloak in her hair. The world seemed to hold its breath. "What do we do now?" she asked quietly. He looked past her, toward the dark forest beyond the courtyard. "You said the potion was meant to reveal truth, not create it." "Yes." "Then maybe that's what this is," he said softly. "Not an enchantment, not magic binding us, but the truth, the kind we'd rather ignore." She stared at him, startled by the honesty in his tone. "You think this, us, means something?" He met her gaze, and for once there was no mockery, no coldness. "I think it already does." The words hung in the air like a spell. Hermione's heart gave a traitorous flutter, one she tried to dismiss as cold or fatigue, but she couldn't. "Malfoy," she began, but he shook his head. "Not tonight, Granger." His voice was soft but firm. "You don't have to say anything. Just think about it." With that, he turned and walked away, his footsteps fading into the snow-covered corridor. Hermione stood there long after he had gone, her heart hammering in her chest. She looked up at the stars, bright and distant, and for the first time, she didn't know whether she wanted the bond gone at all. When she finally returned to Gryffindor Tower, she found sleep impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt that faint pulse again, the echo of his thoughts brushing hers. But now, it wasn't fear or guilt that came through. It was warmth. It was a quiet, wordless question. And, though she would never admit it aloud, she realized she already knew the answer. The bond might have been born from a failed potion, from a mistake in a darkened dungeon, but it had uncovered something neither of them had expected, something neither could unsee. And as the snow fell heavier outside, blanketing the castle in silence, Hermione Granger began to wonder whether the truest kind of magic wasn't the kind you could brew at all. Days passed, slow and silent, yet the air between them had changed. Hermione told herself it was only curiosity that made her glance across the great hall whenever Draco entered. Curiosity that drew her eyes toward the shadowed corner of the library where he always sat. Curiosity and nothing more. But when their gazes met, even across the length of a crowded corridor, something quiet and unspoken passed between them. Something that made her heart stumble and her thoughts lose shape. The bond, though unseen, thrummed softly beneath her skin. Sometimes it was faint, a whisper. Other times it pulsed stronger, alive with emotion. A trace of amusement when he caught her glaring during transfiguration. A flare of irritation when he dropped a quill and pretended not to care. Once, in the stillness of night, she had felt a surge of melancholy so raw that she'd sat up in bed, hand pressed to her chest, whispering his name before she could stop herself. By morning, she had resolved to end it, properly this time, to face the truth and find a way to unravel the connection that bound them before it consumed them both. She found him in the potions storeroom that evening, sorting through jars by wandlight. Dust glittered in the narrow beams of light, and the air smelled of herbs and parchment. "Malfoy," she said softly. He didn't turn at once. "You've made a habit of finding me at my most productive moments." "Or your most evasive," she replied, stepping closer. That earned her a faint smirk, but his eyes, when he looked up, were tired. "What is it, Granger? Another lecture on magical ethics?" "No." She took a steadying breath. "We can't keep pretending this bond doesn't exist. It's affecting us both." He shut the cabinet door with a quiet click. "And what do you suggest? You've already tried your cure." "I think we did it wrong," she said, her voice quickening. The old notes said the spell could only be broken by mutual renunciation. I renounced it, but if you didn't truly mean it, then it would hold. He finished for her, his tone soft, almost resigned. She nodded. "So, tell me honestly, did you want it gone?" Draco didn't answer. Instead, he turned away, hands braced against the edge of the counter. The silence stretched long enough that Hermione thought he wouldn't reply at all. But then he said quietly, "I wanted to want it gone." Her pulse quickened. "That's not the same thing." "No." He turned then, his eyes unreadable. "It isn't." Hermione took a step closer. "Then we need to fix it. Properly this time. You have to want to end it, Malfoy." "And you?" She hesitated. "I have to, as well." He studied her face, the faintest of smiles curving his lips. "You don't sound convinced." Hermione flushed. "This isn't a game." "Neither is whatever this is between us." For a heartbeat, the air seemed to crackle. The faint glow of his wand light threw long shadows across the floor, and the distance between them felt suddenly fragile. Hermione tried to think of something, anything, to break the tension. "We should test the parameters of the bond before we—" But before she could finish, he reached out and took her wrist. The contact was brief, tentative, and yet the moment his skin met hers, a shock of energy pulsed through them both. The light from his wand flared white, filling the room. Hermione gasped. Images flickered behind her eyes. Not words, not thoughts, but feelings. His fear, his guilt, his longing for something unnamed. And beneath it all, a flicker of warmth directed toward her, steady and real. She tore her hand away, breathing hard. "That, whatever that was, it's dangerous." Draco looked as startled as she felt, though he tried to mask it. "Dangerous, yes, but tell me you didn't feel it." "I did," she admitted, her voice trembling. "And that's exactly why we have to stop it." He tilted his head slightly. "Because it frightens you." "Because it changes everything," she said. Neither spoke again for several long seconds. Finally, Hermione turned to leave. "Meet me tomorrow night in the old classroom by the charms corridor. I'll bring a reversal charm that might actually work this time." Draco nodded slowly. "If you're sure that's what you want." "It's what we need," she said firmly, though the words felt hollow as she spoke them. That night, she found no rest. Her thoughts churned like storm clouds, dark and restless. Every logical part of her screamed that she was right, that bonds born from accidental magic could only lead to ruin. But beneath that certainty was another voice, quieter but persistent, whispering that perhaps some accidents were fated. When she met Draco the next evening, the classroom was empty, lit only by a few flickering candles. He was already there, standing beside a circle of runes drawn carefully in chalk on the floor. "You've prepared well," she said, surprised. He gave a short nod. "I've had practice undoing things I wish I hadn't done." Hermione looked at him for a moment, then stepped into the circle opposite him. "All right. When I start the incantation, you'll need to echo the second half. It has to be simultaneous or it won't work." He raised an eyebrow. "And if it doesn't, then we'll know the bond isn't magical anymore." She lifted her wand. "Ready?" He nodded once. The words rolled from her tongue like water, ancient, rhythmic, thrumming with power. The runes began to glow faintly gold, forming threads of light that wound around them both. Draco's voice joined hers, lower, steadier, the harmony strange but beautiful. As they spoke the final phrase, the light flared, wrapping them in warmth, and then burst outward, scattering into motes of gold. Silence followed. Hermione blinked, her breath coming fast. Did it work? Draco looked down, flexing his fingers as though testing an invisible thread. "I don't feel anything." She waited, heart pounding. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, faint but undeniable, a pulse at the edge of her mind. Draco met her gaze, the same realization in his eyes. "It didn't break," she whispered. "No," he said quietly, "but it changed again." The air between them seemed different, no longer heavy, but alive. The light from the candles shimmered brighter, and for a fleeting instant she thought she saw something move between them, a soft shimmer, like starlight caught in glass. Hermione lowered her wand slowly. "Maybe it can't be undone." Draco's expression softened, the faintest hint of a smile touching his lips. "Then maybe we stop trying to fight it." She wanted to argue, to remind him of every reason why this was impossible. But instead, she found herself saying nothing at all. Because deep down, she already knew. Whatever had begun as a potion's mistake had become something no spell could ever truly undo. As they stood there, the golden light fading into the quiet dark, Hermione realized that for the first time in weeks, she wasn't afraid. She was curious. And curiosity, she knew, had always been her greatest weakness and her greatest strength. The days that followed passed like pages in a book she couldn't stop reading. The snow outside deepened into glittering drifts, the wind whistling through the high towers of Hogwarts, and the fires in the common rooms burned low and golden. Christmas was approaching, but Hermione felt little of the usual warmth or excitement. Her thoughts were far from gifts and feasts. They lingered instead on the bond that refused to die, and on the boy who had become the quiet shadow in her mind. At first, she tried to ignore it. She buried herself in her studies, stayed close to Harry and Ginny, laughed at Neville's fumbling attempts to charm holly garlands into twining themselves around the banisters. But even in laughter, she felt it, the steady rhythm of awareness, soft as a heartbeat that tethered her to Draco Malfoy. Once, while writing an essay in the library, she'd suddenly felt a flare of irritation, sharp and brief. The ink in her quill had splattered across her parchment, and before she could curse under her breath, an image had slipped into her mind. A vial exploding in the dungeon, Draco stepping back with a curse, his face streaked with soot. The connection was growing stronger again. Not chaotic as before, but subtle, more controlled. It no longer stole her emotions, it shared them. She began to wonder if, perhaps, it wasn't a curse at all. When she finally saw Draco again, It was on the marble staircase near the entrance hall. Students were drifting past, carrying bundles of mistletoe and enchanted candles for the Christmas feast. Draco stood apart, leaning against the banister, his hair dusted with snow. "Granger," he said when she stopped near him. "I was beginning to think you were avoiding me." She met his gaze evenly. "Maybe I was, or maybe you were avoiding me." He smirked faintly. "Touché." Then, after a pause, "The reversal didn't work, did it?" Hermione sighed. "No, it only made it different." "Different how?" "Less intrusive, but also," she hesitated, unsure how to explain it, "more real. It's not magic anymore. It feels like awareness, like knowing someone is there, even when you can't see them." Draco's eyes softened, the silver grey of them reflecting the torchlight. "That doesn't sound like a curse." "No," she admitted quietly. "It doesn't." They stood there for a long moment, neither speaking. The air between them felt almost fragile, suspended on some invisible thread that neither dared to touch. Finally, Draco said, "I've been thinking." "That's dangerous," she replied automatically, and his smirk returned for an instant. He ignored it. "If this bond refuses to break, maybe it's trying to tell us something. Maybe it's not a mistake. Maybe it's a—" "Don't say destiny," Hermione interrupted sharply. "I refuse to believe any potion can decide that." Draco's lips curved into the faintest smile. "You sound like you're trying to convince yourself." She opened her mouth to argue, but the words didn't come. Instead, she said, "There's a difference between fate and choice. I believe in choice." "So do I," he said softly. His tone disarmed her. There was no mockery in it, no pride, just quiet sincerity. Hermione looked away, her heart beating faster than she liked. "Christmas is in 2 days," she said quickly. "Most students are leaving for the holidays. And you?" "I'm staying. There's still work to finish." He nodded once. "Then I'll stay too." The simplicity of his words startled her. "You don't have to." "I know," he said, "but I want to." That night, as snow thickened outside and the castle emptied of noise, Hermione found herself walking down to the dungeons again. She told herself it was to study, but when she entered the old potions lab, she wasn't surprised to find Draco already there. He was sitting on the edge of the long work table, a lantern flickering beside him. "You came," he said simply. "I told you, I needed to study." "Right," he said dryly. "And the fact that you're holding no books at all has nothing to do with it." Hermione gave him a look that would have silenced most people. Draco only smiled faintly, a small, real smile that softened his usually sharp features. They spent the next hour talking, not about magic or school, but about the things they'd never thought to share. He spoke of the manor, of his mother's quiet grace, of how strange it felt to be trusted again after the war. Hermione told him of her fears, of the nights she still woke hearing the echoes of battle. It was strange, sitting there together, two people who once could not speak without venom, now bound by something neither could name. At one point, Draco stood and crossed to the window. Snow pressed against the glass, the flakes swirling thickly in the light. "It's strange," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The castle feels different at night, like it remembers everything that's happened here, but it still forgives us for it." Hermione joined him, standing close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his sleeve. "Maybe that's what makes it magic," she said softly. Not the spells, the forgiveness. He turned to look at her, and in that moment she felt the bond stir again. Not intrusive, not painful, but gentle. Their thoughts brushed together like the edge of a flame. He reached out, hesitated, then let his fingers rest lightly against hers. "Tell me you don't feel that," he said quietly. Hermione's breath caught. "I feel it." "It's not the bond," he murmured. "Not anymore." And somehow she knew he was right. The moment broke when a clock somewhere in the distance chimed midnight. Hermione stepped back quickly, her cheeks burning. "We should go. It's late." Draco nodded, but his gaze lingered. "Good night, Granger." "Good night," she whispered, and fled before her voice betrayed her. That night, as she lay awake listening to the snow against the window, she tried to convince herself that nothing had changed, that the bond was still only a remnant of potion magic, that her heart hadn't quickened when he'd looked at her like that. But when she closed her eyes, she felt it again, a flicker of warmth, a spark of quiet thought. Not words, but something deeper. And though miles of stone and shadow lay between them, she knew Draco Malfoy was awake too, staring into the same restless darkness, feeling the same impossible truth. Whatever force had drawn them together, potion, fate, or something nameless, it had not finished with them yet. And somewhere in the stillness of the castle, the old stones seemed to hum with it too, as if Hogwarts itself knew that a new kind of magic had taken root within its ancient walls. Christmas morning arrived in quiet splendor. A hush had settled over the castle, the kind of peace that made even the portraits doze in their frames. Snow blanketed every tower and courtyard, shimmering in the early light. The great hall was nearly empty, its enchanted ceiling a soft grey sky. Only a handful of students remained, scattered among the long tables. Hermione sat alone near the front, a book open before her, though she had not turned a page in half an hour. The scent of pine from the towering Christmas tree filled the room, and the fire crackled softly in the hearth. But her mind was elsewhere, drifting inevitably toward the dungeons, toward the boy she couldn't seem to stop thinking about. She hadn't seen Draco since that night by the window. She'd told herself that was for the best. Whatever lingered between them, it needed to fade. She needed to let it. Yet even as she tried to will it away, the thought of him pulled at her, steady, insistent, like the tug of a current beneath still water. Her quill lay forgotten on the table when a shadow fell across the page. "Studying on Christmas morning?" His voice was smooth, edged with faint amusement. Hermione looked up, startled. Draco stood before her, snow clinging to his cloak and hair, the pale winter light outlining him in silver. He looked out of place in the warmth of the great hall, too composed, too quiet, but his eyes held something that made her pulse quicken. "Old habits die hard," she said softly. "What are you doing here?" He shrugged. "Couldn't sleep." "Nor could I." He hesitated, then sat across from her. For a while, neither spoke. The fire snapped, and outside, snow fell steadily against the high windows. Draco finally broke the silence. "You're thinking about it again, aren't you?" Hermione's brow furrowed. "The bond?" He nodded. She hesitated. "It's hard not to. It's quieter now, but it's still there." "I know." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I feel it too." There was something different about his tone. No irritation, no mockery, only a quiet acceptance, as if he had stopped fighting it long ago. Hermione closed her book, the weight of unspoken words pressing against her chest. Maybe this is what the potion was meant to do. Maybe it wasn't meant to be undone. Draco's gaze met hers, steady and unreadable. You really think it chose us for a reason? I don't know. She looked down, tracing the edge of her book with a fingertip. But whatever it is, it's teaching me things I never wanted to learn. Such as that I can't always reason my way through everything, that sometimes feelings don't follow logic. He gave a soft, almost wistful laugh. That's the first truly Gryffindor thing I've ever heard you say. Hermione smiled despite herself. Don't tell anyone. It would ruin my reputation. They fell into silence again, but this time it felt different, comfortable, like the quiet between 2 pages of a story. Outside, the morning light brightened, spilling gold across the long tables. After a while, Draco stood. Walk with me. Hermione hesitated, then nodded. They left the great hall and stepped into the courtyard. The snow was untouched, smooth as silk, glinting in the sun. Their footsteps left twin trails behind them as they crossed toward the frozen fountain. Draco stopped, turning to face her. When we were bound, he began, you saw things. My memories. Yes, Hermione said quietly. I didn't mean to. I know, but you saw what I was, what I did. You saw everything I hate about myself. His voice wavered slightly. And yet, you're still here. Hermione met his eyes. Because what I saw wasn't just darkness. It was pain. Regret. The part of you that tried to be better when no one was watching. He looked away, snowflakes melting against his lashes. You shouldn't defend me. I'm not, she said softly. I'm just telling you what's true. Something flickered across his face then, something raw and uncertain. You're not afraid of me anymore. No, she admitted. I don't think I ever was. I was angry, hurt, but not afraid. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, very slowly, he stepped closer. The cold air between them seemed to hum faintly, alive with the same strange energy that had once bound them. Do you still feel it? He asked quietly. Yes, she whispered. Do you? Always. The world seemed to still. The snow fell softly around them, and for a heartbeat, Hermione thought she could hear the faint echo of her own heartbeat mirrored in his chest. She should have stepped back. She knew she should have. But something in the air, the warmth of his gaze, the steady pull of the unseen thread between them, held her still. He reached up slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His fingers were cold, but the touch sent a spark through her veins. I used to think love potions were the most dangerous kind of magic, Draco murmured. But I was wrong. Hermione swallowed, her breath catching. And what's more dangerous than a love potion? He hesitated, eyes locked on hers. The kind of magic that isn't brewed or cast, the kind that happens without your consent. For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to pause. Then, before she could speak, he dropped his hand and stepped back. I shouldn't have said that, he muttered. Forget it. Hermione wanted to protest, to tell him she couldn't forget it even if she tried. But the words caught in her throat. They stood there, snow falling silently around them. Finally, she said, You're right. It's dangerous. But that doesn't mean it's wrong. He looked at her sharply, something unreadable flickering in his expression. But before either could say more, a bell rang in the distance, signalling breakfast's end. Hermione turned toward the castle. "We should go." Draco didn't move at first. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "You'll never stop trying to understand everything, will you?" "Probably not," she said, smiling faintly. "It's who I am." As she walked away, she felt the bond pulse once, warm, gentle, almost like a sigh. And though she didn't look back, she knew he was watching her, the snow swirling softly between them like a curtain of light. Later, alone in the quiet of her room, Hermione opened her journal and wrote only one line before closing it again. The potion didn't fail. It revealed what was already there. Outside, the storm deepened, and somewhere in the dungeons, Draco Malfoy stood by the window, feeling that same quiet truth settle in his chest. Whatever had begun between them, it was no longer something either of them could explain away. It had become part of them, woven into the very magic that bound Hogwarts itself, impossible to undo. The days after Christmas unfolded in soft, unbroken quiet. The castle, half empty and gleaming with frost, seemed to hold its breath. The portraits whispered slower, the staircases barely shifted, as if the magic of Hogwarts itself had grown contemplative. Hermione spent her mornings in the library, the afternoons by the window in the common room, quill idle in her fingers. She told herself she was studying, but her thoughts never stayed still for long. They drifted again and again toward the same person, the same silver-eyed presence that refused to fade. Draco had become a constant echo in her mind, not intrusive, not unwanted, but steady, like a heartbeat heard from afar. Sometimes she felt his emotions ripple faintly through her, not as clear as before, but enough to make her pause. A flare of concentration, the warmth of amusement, the ache of some unspoken memory. At first, she tried to fight it. Now, she wasn't sure she wanted to. On the second morning after Christmas, she found herself walking toward the dungeons without consciously deciding to. Her feet seemed to know before her mind did. The air grew cooler as she descended, the light dimmer. When she reached the old potion lab, she hesitated only a moment before pushing the door open. Draco was there, of course. He stood by the window, pale sunlight falling across his face, dust motes drifting lazily in the still air. A book lay open on the table beside him, forgotten. He looked up as she entered, and for a heartbeat, they simply stared at one another. "I thought you'd gone home," he said at last. "I changed my mind," she replied. He smiled faintly. "Of course you did." Hermione stepped closer. "I wanted to talk to you." "That sounds ominous." "It isn't." She hesitated, then added, "Not entirely." He arched an eyebrow. "Go on." Hermione folded her arms, steadying herself. "When the potion bonded us, it connected our thoughts, our emotions. But now, it feels different. It's like it's settled into something more natural. I think the magic is fading, but what's left behind?" She trailed off, unable to find the right word. Draco's gaze softened. "Real?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, real." For a long moment, silence filled the space between them, fragile but charged. Then Draco said quietly, "You're not wrong. I feel it too." Hermione's heart thudded painfully. "And what do you make of it?" He gave a soft, almost incredulous laugh. "You want me to analyze it? Merlin, Granger, you'd turn even this into a research project." "Maybe I would," she said, smiling despite herself. "But this, whatever it is, It's complicated, and I don't like not understanding it. Draco's expression shifted, the humor fading. You don't have to understand everything to feel it. His words struck her with quiet force. She looked away, toward the shelves lined with old potion jars. That's easy for you to say. Not really, he said softly. I've spent my whole life trying not to feel anything at all. Hermione turned back to him, startled by the honesty in his voice. I used to think emotions were weaknesses, Draco continued, staring past her out the window at the falling snow. They made you reckless, vulnerable, easier to hurt. But lately, he exhaled, his breath misting faintly in the cold air. Lately, I'm not so sure. Something inside Hermione shifted then, a quiet unraveling she hadn't expected. She stepped closer until she could see the faint line of tension in his shoulders, the way his hand curled slightly against the window frame. You're not weak for feeling, Malfoy. You're human. He looked at her, and the faintest trace of a smile touched his lips. You make that sound like a good thing. It is. The silence that followed was soft, not awkward. Hermione could hear the faint drip of melting ice outside, the muted whisper of wind through the cracks in the window. Then Draco turned, fully facing her. You should know, he said quietly. This connection, it doesn't scare me anymore, not the way it did. Hermione blinked. It doesn't? No. It's strange, yes. Unnatural, maybe. But for the first time in a long while, it feels like something right found me instead of the other way around. The words hit her with unexpected warmth. She wanted to answer, but before she could, she felt it. The bond, pulsing softly between them like a heartbeat of magic. Not strong enough to control, but alive enough to remind her that they were still bound, still sharing something unseen. She took a slow breath. Then maybe we shouldn't fight it anymore. Draco's gaze held hers unflinching. Are you sure? Once you stop resisting, there's no pretending it doesn't exist. I'm tired of pretending, she whispered. For a heartbeat, he didn't move. Then he stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, smell the faint scent of cedar and parchment clinging to his cloak. The air between them seemed to hum with quiet magic. He reached up, fingers brushing the edge of her scarf. You'll freeze down here, he said softly. I'm fine, she murmured, though her voice trembled. Liar. He tugged the scarf gently, the gesture oddly tender. And though he didn't say anything more, she felt the rest of the words anyway, through the bond, through the fragile thread that connected them still. You're safe here. Hermione's heart beat painfully fast. She stepped back before she did something reckless, like reach for him. I should go, she said, barely above a whisper. Draco didn't stop her, but as she turned toward the door, his voice followed her, low and steady. Granger. She paused, hand on the handle. When you said the magic's fading, he said, you're wrong. She looked back, frowning. What do you mean? He met her eyes. It's not fading. It's changing, becoming something else. Hermione swallowed. And what do you think it's becoming? Draco's lips curved into the faintest smile. You already know. She didn't reply. She couldn't. The truth of it was too large, too heavy to name aloud. When she left the dungeon, the corridors were silent except for the faint hum of distant wind. Yet as she walked, the bond pulsed once more, warm, steady, almost like a heartbeat pressed against her own. Later that night, in her room, Hermione sat by the fire, the flickering light painting gold across the floor. She stared into the flames and whispered to herself, "He's right." Because the magic hadn't gone at all. It had transformed into something that defied reason, something neither of them could bottle or break. It was no longer the potion that had gone wrong. It was the connection that had gone right. And deep down, Hermione Granger, logical, brave, stubborn to the last, finally began to understand that some magic was never meant to be explained. It was only meant to be felt. The new year dawned over Hogwarts in a blaze of pale gold and quiet promise. The snow still clung to the grounds, glittering under the morning sun, but there was a subtle shift in the air, a sense of renewal, of breath held between the old and the new. Students returning from the holidays filled the corridors once more, laughter echoing off the stone walls. Yet even as the castle came alive again, Hermione felt herself caught in a strange stillness, like the world around her was moving, but she remained standing in place. She hadn't spoken to Draco since the day in the dungeon. The memory of his voice, his calm, certain words, echoed in her mind far too often for comfort. It's not fading, it's changing. She had tried to reason with it, to reduce what they shared to something explainable. Logic had always been her armor, her wand against uncertainty. But logic was useless now. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt him, his presence, his thoughts brushing hers like the ghost of a touch. It wasn't intrusive anymore. It was simply there, steady, familiar. The first day of classes after the holiday found her seated in the library, her quill hovering uselessly over a half-finished essay. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the tall windows, and the faint murmur of other students formed a distant hum. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice when the chair across from her scraped softly against the floor. "Your handwriting's slipping," came the quiet voice. Hermione looked up, startled. Draco sat opposite her, his hair a little disheveled, his cloak flecked with melting snow. His expression was unreadable, though his eyes carried that same faint warmth she'd noticed before Christmas. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said. He smirked slightly. "You say that every time." "Because you never used to be here." He leaned back, folding his arms. "Maybe I've decided to take a page from your book. Knowledge is power, isn't it?" Hermione's lips twitched. "You quoting me now?" "Don't flatter yourself, Granger." But the corners of his mouth lifted, betraying amusement. For a few moments, the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was comfortable, familiar. Finally, Hermione said quietly, "I've been thinking." "That's never a good sign," he murmured. She ignored him. "About the bond." He looked at her sharply. "Of course you have. I think it's evolving, becoming part of us rather than something imposed upon us." Draco tilted his head. "And what does that mean?" "That it's not the potion anymore," she said. "It's us. Our magic responded to it, but it changed shape because we changed. It isn't forcing anything. It's reflecting what's already there." Her voice faltered at the end because the truth of it trembled between them like the thread that still connected their minds. Draco didn't look away. "And what is already there, Granger?" Hermione hesitated. She could lie. She was good at logic, at self-control. But in that moment, she couldn't find the strength for either. "Something I don't quite understand," she admitted softly. "Something I don't want to lose." For a long time, Draco didn't move. Then, very slowly, he reached across the table and took her quill from her hand. His fingers brushed hers, and the world seemed to narrow to that single, fleeting point of contact. "You don't have to understand it," he said quietly. "Not everything in this world makes sense. You, of all people, should know that by now." Hermione drew in a shaky breath. "Maybe, but understanding things is how I make sense of the world. And when the world refuses to be understood." She looked into his eyes, into the depths of silver and shadow. "Then I suppose I'll have to learn how to trust it instead." Draco's mouth curved slightly. "There's hope for you yet, Granger." She laughed softly. Something fragile but real. "Don't ruin it by sounding smug." He only smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I wouldn't dream of it." The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. The rhythm of their silence was its own language now, a series of unspoken thoughts that neither could name without breaking something delicate and new. When Draco rose to leave, he paused beside her chair. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. Hermione looked up, meeting his gaze. "If you're not afraid of being seen studying with a Gryffindor." He smirked. Let them stare. And then he was gone, his footsteps echoing softly against the stone floor. That night, as she sat by the fire in the Gryffindor common room, Hermione found herself staring into the flames, her quill forgotten once again. The bond pulsed faintly, a quiet presence at the back of her mind, warm and steady. For the first time, she didn't fight it. She let it settle around her like a familiar cloak. In her dreams that night, she stood by the black lake. The moonlight shimmered across the frozen water, and Draco stood opposite her, his reflection rippling beneath the ice. He said nothing, but when she reached out, their hands met. Not through magic, not through illusion, but through something real. When she woke, the morning light was spilling across her bed, golden and soft. Her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. Later that day, she found herself walking toward the courtyard. The snow had begun to melt, revealing patches of green beneath the frost. She spotted Draco standing by the old fountain, his cloak billowing in the wind. "You're early," he said as she approached. "I couldn't sleep." He gave a faint, knowing smile. Neither could I. They stood there for a while, watching the light shift on the castle walls. The bond was quiet now, not pulling, not pushing, simply existing. Hermione realized with a strange sense of peace that perhaps this was how magic was meant to be. Unpredictable, untamed, yet profoundly alive. Draco glanced at her. "You know, this isn't how I imagined my last year at Hogwarts." "Oh?" she asked. "And what did you imagine?" "Loneliness," he said honestly. "Regret, the kind of silence that never leaves you." Hermione's throat tightened. "And now?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Now it's different." Hermione smiled faintly. "Good." As the bells tolled in the distance, marking the end of another day, she felt the bond stir one last time. Not demanding, not magical, but entirely human. It whispered across her heart like a breath, and in that whisper was a promise. Whatever came next, they would face it not as enemies, not as strangers bound by accident, but as two souls who had finally, against all reason, found each other in the ruins of what had been. And as the sun dipped behind the castle walls, painting the snow in shades of rose and gold, Hermione Granger understood that some stories weren't meant to be solved like riddles. Some were meant to be lived. One heartbeat, one choice, one impossible connection at a time. By February, the winter began to lose its hold. The great lake had cracked its frozen shell, sending dark ripples spreading out from the center. The castle smelled faintly of rain instead of snow, and green buds began to stir in the flower beds by the greenhouses. Yet inside Hogwarts, something else had started to bloom. Something that neither Hermione nor Draco could name, though it filled every quiet glance, every accidental brush of hands, every word unspoken between them. Classes had returned to their usual chaos. The younger students darted through the halls, whispering about upcoming exams and Valentine's Day festivities. Pink confetti and charmed roses had begun to appear overnight, fluttering in unexpected places. Hermione rolled her eyes at the decorations, but every time she passed a pair of students exchanging shy smiles, she felt a curious ache in her chest. She had never been one for sentiment. Yet this year, the castle's warmth seemed to echo something inside her that she couldn't quite ignore. It was during one such morning, cold, grey and restless, that she found Draco in the library again. He was leaning against a shelf near the far window, his head bent over a thick volume of arithmancy notes. The pale light caught his hair, making it shimmer like silver thread. "You're here early," she said softly, approaching him. He looked up, a faint smirk tugging at his mouth. "Could say the same about you." "I couldn't sleep." "Then we're even." Hermione hesitated, then sat across from him. She pulled out her own parchment, but neither of them opened a book. The silence between them had grown comfortable lately, the kind that no longer felt like waiting. Finally, Draco spoke, his voice low. "There's a Hogsmeade visit this weekend." "I know," she said, eyes on her parchment. "Are you going?" "I hadn't planned to." He raised an eyebrow. "Of course not. Granger the studious, too busy for butterbeer." She looked up at him sharply. "And what about you? Malfoy the aloof, too proud for company." His smirk widened slightly. "Maybe I'm changing." Hermione smiled despite herself. "Maybe we both are." He tilted his head, studying her as though trying to decipher a spell. "If you're not going, then neither will I." "Why not?" "Because," he said simply, "the only person I'd want to go with seems intent on staying here." Her breath caught. The words were casual, but the look in his eyes wasn't. There was no arrogance in it, no challenge, only quiet honesty. "I don't think that would be wise," Hermione managed to say, though her voice trembled. Draco's gaze softened. "No, probably not. But when has wisdom ever been your weakness?" She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You're impossible." "Completely," he agreed. "So come with me anyway." Hermione stared at him for a long moment, weighing reason against the strange pull in her chest. She had spent months denying it, calling it a side effect of the potion, a remnant of accidental magic. But as she sat there, watching him watch her, she understood the truth she had been avoiding. The potion hadn't made her feel anything that wasn't already there. It had only revealed it. "Fine," she said at last, trying not to smile. "One drink." Draco's lips curved. "I'll take it." The village of Hogsmeade was wrapped in mist when they arrived that weekend. The cobbled streets glistened with melted snow, and the smell of butterbeer and sugar drifted from the 3 broomsticks. Hermione pulled her cloak tighter as they walked side by side through the winding streets. It felt almost strange, this normalcy, their steps matching, their shoulders brushing occasionally as if by accident. When they reached the inn, Madame Rosmerta's smile faltered only slightly at the sight of them together before she gestured them toward a corner booth. 2 butterbeers, Draco said, sliding a few coins onto the counter. Hermione frowned. You don't have to. I know, he said lightly, but I want to. She didn't argue. They sat across from each other, the warmth of the fire glowing against their faces. Outside, the mist pressed against the windows, making the world feel smaller, enclosed, as if only they existed within it. Hermione took a sip of her drink. This feels strange. Draco tilted his head. Being civil? Being this? She gestured vaguely between them. Whatever this is. He was quiet for a moment before replying. It's real. That's all it needs to be. She looked at him. Really looked. The sharp lines of his face had softened since the war, the coldness in his eyes replaced by something deeper, something she had never thought she'd see there. Compassion, understanding, and something else. Hermione's pulse quickened. She should have stopped herself, but she couldn't. Do you ever wonder, she asked softly, if things might have been different? If the war hadn't? If we'd met under different circumstances? He smiled, a small, rueful thing. No, because if things had been different, we wouldn't be here now. The simplicity of the answer silenced her. A long pause followed, filled only by the crackle of the fire. Then Draco leaned forward slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to be afraid of what this is, Granger. I'm not afraid, she said, though she knew it wasn't entirely true. He reached across the table then, his hand brushing hers. The touch was light, tentative, but it carried more weight than any spell. The bond between them pulsed once, soft, warm, alive, and she felt his thoughts flicker through her mind. Not words, but emotions. Calm, hope, and a quiet, patient affection that made her chest ache. She met his eyes, her breath unsteady. You can't read my mind, can you? He smiled faintly. No, but I can feel your answer. Hermione's cheeks flushed, though she didn't pull her hand away. And what's my answer? That you're tired of pretending, he said gently. She laughed then, a soft, helpless sound. Maybe I am. The hours passed unnoticed after that. When they finally left the inn, the fog had lifted, revealing a clear sky filled with stars. They walked back toward the castle in silence, the cold air sharp against their cheeks. At the foot of the bridge leading to Hogwarts, Draco stopped. I suppose this is where you tell me it meant nothing, he said lightly, though there was a trace of uncertainty beneath his calm tone. Hermione turned to him. The torchlight cast golden halos across the snow. You know, I won't say that. He smiled, a quiet, grateful smile that reached his eyes this time. Good. They stood there a moment longer, neither speaking, the world holding itself perfectly still. Then, before she could think better of it, Hermione stepped forward and pressed her hand against his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath her palm. Whatever this is, she whispered, let's not ruin it by trying to define it. Draco's breath caught. You always have to have the last word, don't you? She smiled faintly. Always. And as they turned toward the castle together, the stars above them seemed to burn a little brighter, as though even the heavens themselves recognized that something fragile, impossible, and profoundly human had taken root between them. something no potion could create and no magic could erase. Spring crept gently into the castle, unhurried and full of light. The snow withdrew from the hills in slow surrender, and the grounds awoke with the scent of wet earth and new life. The lake shone again, glassy and deep, and soft green crept up the ivy that had slept for months against the castle walls. Hermione could feel the shift in everything, the hum of magic in the air, the warmth in the breeze that swept through the corridors, the faint pulse of something alive in her chest. It had been weeks since the Hogsmeade visit, yet that day lingered in her mind, like the echo of a spell that refused to fade. The connection between her and Draco had changed once more. It wasn't the fierce, unsteady current it had been at first. It had become something quieter, steadier, woven into her in ways she no longer questioned. She didn't sense his thoughts now, not clearly. But sometimes when she felt joy or peace, she caught a flicker of the same emotion from far away, as if they shared a single rhythm of breath. One evening, after classes, she sat on the stone steps near the courtyard, watching the sunlight stretch long across the grass. Students passed by in small groups, their laughter carrying on the wind. Hermione smiled faintly. The castle felt alive again, in a way it hadn't for years. Yet she still felt a tug, an awareness, pulling her toward the dungeons. She didn't resist it. When she reached the familiar doorway, she found Draco at the long work table, parchment scattered around him. A single candle burned low beside him, the golden light catching the edges of his hair. He looked up as she entered, the faintest smile touching his lips. "I was wondering when you'd come. You were expecting me?" "Always." Hermione rolled her eyes, though her heart fluttered. "You sound entirely too confident, Malfoy." He gestured to the empty stool beside him. "Confidence isn't the same as arrogance. You of all people should appreciate the distinction." Hermione sat, glancing over the parchment before her. "You're studying late." "Not studying," he said. "Thinking. That's more dangerous." He chuckled softly. "You're not wrong." For a while, they simply sat in the companionable silence that had grown natural between them. Outside, the faint song of the lake reached them, a low hum that mingled with the whisper of the wind through the stone cracks. Finally, Draco said, "Do you ever think about what comes after this?" Hermione looked up. "After Hogwarts?" He nodded. "After we leave? After all of this?" She hesitated. "Sometimes it feels strange to imagine a world beyond these walls. Hogwarts has always been constant." He leaned back slightly, studying her. "You'll go off to do great things, of course. The Ministry will fall over itself to have you. And you." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know yet." "Maybe that's all right," she said softly. "Not knowing." Draco gave a faint smile. "You'd think so, wouldn't you? But I spent so long doing what was expected of me that not knowing feels like walking blind." Hermione thought for a moment, then said gently, "Then maybe it's time to stop looking for paths and start choosing one." He turned his gaze toward her, his expression thoughtful. "You make it sound easy." "It isn't," she admitted, "but it's worth trying." Their eyes met, and for a long moment the world seemed to still around them. The faint candlelight flickered, casting their shadows against the wall, intertwined. Draco's voice was quiet when he spoke again. "The bond between us, it's still there." Hermione's breath caught. "I know. Do you ever wish it weren't?" She didn't answer immediately. She could have said yes. She should have said yes. Life would be simpler without it. But as she looked at him, sitting there with his guarded sincerity, the truth refused to be silenced. "No," she said finally. "Not anymore." He nodded, as though he had expected that answer. "Good." The word was barely audible, but it carried more weight than any spell. The candle burned lower as the night deepened. Draco reached for one of the old notebooks from their earlier experiments, the same one that had started it all. The cover was worn, the pages stained with traces of potion residue. He turned it over in his hands, then set it down gently between them. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "The potion, that night." Hermione shook her head. "It was a mistake, but not all mistakes are wrong." A faint, almost wistful smile touched his lips. "You're beginning to sound like me." "Merlin forbid." He laughed quietly, the sound echoing softly in the small room. Hermione found herself smiling too, the warmth of it chasing away the lingering chill. After a moment, he sobered. "When the bond first happened, I hated it. I thought it was punishment. But now," he hesitated, eyes meeting hers. "Now, I think it saved me." Hermione's throat tightened. "How?" "Because it forced me to see things I never would have otherwise," he said. "To feel things I'd buried. It made me face who I was, and who I wanted to be." Hermione reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. The bond pulsed faintly in response, a gentle shimmer of warmth that spread through the air like the quiet breath of spring. "You did that yourself," she said softly. "The bond only showed you where to look." He turned his hand over, catching hers. "Maybe, but I wouldn't have found it without you." She wanted to protest, to remind him that he didn't owe her anything. But instead, she said, "Then I'm glad it happened." Draco studied her, the candlelight dancing in his eyes. "You mean that?" "Yes." The silence that followed was full, not empty, not heavy, but alive. Then Draco stood, his hand still holding hers, and pulled her gently to her feet. "Come on," he said. "Where are we going?" "You'll see." He led her through the quiet corridors until they reached the astronomy tower. The night was clear, the stars glittering in an ocean of dark blue. The air smelled of rain and stone and new beginnings. They stood at the railing side by side, the wind tugging at their robes. Below them, the grounds shimmered in the moonlight, silver and green. "It's beautiful," Hermione whispered. "It always was," Draco said. "We just never looked closely enough." She turned to him, her hair catching the wind. "What happens now?" He looked down at her, his eyes bright in the starlight. "Now, we live. Whatever this is between us, whatever it becomes, it's ours. No potions, no magic, just choice." Hermione smiled, her chest tight with something that felt like hope. "Then I choose this." He didn't answer, but his hand found hers again, warm and steady. They stood together beneath the wide, endless sky, the castle whispering around them. The bond no longer hummed with urgency or fear. It had settled into something quieter, something that belonged not to fate, but to them. And as the stars wheeled overhead, Hermione realized that the potion she had once called a failure had instead done the most extraordinary thing of all. It had revealed the truth that love, when it came, was not a force to be conjured or controlled. It was something wild, unexpected, and deeply human. Something that, like magic itself, asked only to be believed. and believe she did.